gentlemen, I am Captain Joshua Kong and a recent graduate of Boston College's Masters of Science in Cybersecurity, Policy, and Governance, and it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General Kevin Kennedy. Lieutenant General Kennedy is currently the Commander, 16th Air Force, Commander, Air Force Cyber, and Commander, Joint Force Headquarters Cyber, based at Joint Base San Antonio-Lackland, Texas. Lieutenant General Kennedy has led over 49,000 personnel conducting global information warfare activities spanning cyberspace and information operations, electronic warfare, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, targeting, public affairs, and weather for 9 wings, 1 technical center, and an operations center. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Lieutenant General Kevin Kennedy back to Boston College. Sir.
Well, thank you. So the good thing is the FBI and Cyber Command are well aligned. The bad thing is the Assistant Director took a lot of my talk as we're looking forward. But the other good thing is I'm a New England native and don't have the conflict of interest with Boston sports. And so we'll have that going for us. Go Celts. All right, good morning. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to join you today at the 2024 Boston Conference on Cybersecurity. This is my 3rd time attending this event, and I find it very insightful and worthwhile every time I do. I was also at the COVID conference. Kevin, thanks. I appreciate that. But I would be remiss if I did not start by extending my deepest thanks and gratitude to our hosts and the organizers of this world-class event. Particularly extending my thanks to Boston College, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Mr. Kevin Powers. Kevin, thank you for the work you do to highlight the importance of cybersecurity, and for ensuring that we can gather each year at this event for important conversations. It is an honor to be part of a thriving global cybersecurity community that provides opportunities to strengthen our national security. As the commander of 16th Air Force and Air Force's Cyber, I have the privilege to lead 49,000 dedicated airmen across 120 global operating locations, executing operations across our intelligence, information, electronic warfare, and weather enterprises, to include also 15,000 talented airmen whose sole mission is to defend and advance our nation's interests in, through, and from the cyber domain. It's a mission that requires many partners and allies internationally and within our own borders, military and civilian organizations working with a shared purpose to secure the domain. Working together operationally, as well as gathering at events such as this conference, to build unity of effort and unity of action across government, industry, and academia. Today, I'd like to share with you my perspective that I've gained as a member of the U.S. Cyber Command team, as well as the Air Force Service Cryptologic Component Commander for the Security Service in support of the National Security Agency. I'll focus on 3 areas: the strategic and operational environment, the importance of partnerships across government, academia, and industry, and how together we can meet the national security challenges of the 21st century. First, a few points about the strategic environment and the characteristics of the operational environment in which we operate as cyber leaders and cyber-focused organizations. Unlike the conflicts of the past centuries, our adversaries are no longer constrained by oceans, mountains, and distance. In today's hyper-connected world, our competitors and potential adversaries are able to connect directly to the American people, civilians, employees of our companies, even our military members. This presents a pervasive and persistent challenge, as well as an imperative to continually expose and disrupt our adversaries' actions and malign intent. If there was ever any doubt, the past 2 years of conflict on Europe's eastern flank have shown the vital importance of collaborative cyber security to military operations as well as civilian institutions. In addition, these past 2 years have shown increasing cybersecurity challenges faced by our businesses, our communities, our insurance companies, healthcare, hospitals, banks, towns, state governments, and in turn, our national security. With that in mind, I offer some tenets for us to consider as leaders charged with defending our nation. First, as the 20th century and in the 21st century, no nation can successfully secure itself in isolation. Not only does this apply to the physical domains of air, land, sea, and space, it also applies to cyber. Second, The necessary level of persistent engagement within the cyber domain requires close and continuous collaboration with allies, partners, industry, academia, and across government. And finally, from a military or national security perspective, the victor in the 21st century conflicts will be the coalition that enables the greatest level of information sharing and cross-nation technological integration. Within the cyber domain, the baseline skills we build in cyber defense, coupled with the proficiency and tradecraft of our cyber practitioners, will determine who will have the advantage in the critical days of crisis. Advantage in cyberspace will go to the entity postured to understand and anticipate changes in the environment, and postured to act on fleeting opportunities with speed, scale, agility, and precision. In addition, accelerating technological change and global interconnectedness are rapidly expanding the art of the possible. Our security depends on how rapidly we adapt. The advantage will go to those who see first, recognize first, adapt first, and apply first. As the U.S. Cyber Command Commander General Hawk recently stated during remarks about conflict in the cyber domain, it is no longer the big that eat the small, but now it is the fast that eat the slow. This is why agile partnerships with rapid and collaborative innovation are crucial. While conflict is not inevitable, the critical days for delivering these skills and readiness across our nation have arrived. There will be further crises that test our resolve and our will, as well as set the conditions for any potential conflict. That leads me to my second topic, the importance of partnerships. It was just a few months ago, and this is where he stole my talking point, the FBI, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, the National Security Agency, as well as partners from Australia, Canada, and New Zealand published a cybersecurity advisory that Volt Typhoon, a Chinese Communist Party-sponsored hacking group, had gained access to our networks. The effects of their access of targeting civilian infrastructure of a nation are not focused on attacking our military force. It is something that every person in this room should be concerned about. It means our competitors and potential adversaries are proactively posturing to sever communications, disrupt pipelines, pollute water sources, and destroy natural resources in times of crisis or conflict, all with the intent to incite panic and chaos. There is no reason for them to be in our water. There is no reason for them to be in our power. This is a decision by an actor to focus on civilian targets. Responsible cyber actors do not target the civilian infrastructure. We must be clear-eyed about what is in front of us. The initial skirmishes of potential great power conflicts are happening in competition right now, today, in 2024. And they are often focused on our economy, our adversaries, our critical infrastructure, and our adversaries are conducting deliberate campaigns that underscore the need for robust cybersecurity partnerships, proactive planning, and risk-informed policy. From a military perspective, U.S. Cyber Command has responded via a doctrine of persistent engagement, conducting continuous proactive operations in close collaboration with government agencies, the private sector and academia, and our allies and partners. This broad collaboration is a principal advantage in contesting adversaries during competition and preparing for crises. One example of our successful collaboration in cybersecurity is the U.S. Cyber Command's Hunt Forward operations. Hunt Forward operations deploy small United States teams to hunt for adversaries alongside our ally and partners on their networks, helping hunt for adversaries that are within their networks, gaining critical insight that we can then share and allow us to expose and disrupt adversary activities. These operations exemplify how collaborative cybersecurity can enhance our collective cyber defense. U.S. Cyber Command personnel deployed 22 times to 17 countries in partner-enabled hunt-forward operations. That constrained the adversary's freedom of maneuver, supported our partners' efforts to increase their cyber defense, and generated important insights for our defense. This has led to public releases of more than 90 malware samples for analysis by our cybersecurity community. Such disclosures can make billions of internet users around the world safer and frustrate the military and intelligence operations of authoritative regimes. Another example is led by one of our key partners, U.S. Cyber Command's key interagency partner, the United States Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. They have leveraged information from our government and industry partners to find and eradicate Chinese intrusions in multiple critical infrastructure sectors, including aviation, water, energy, and transportation. They continue to work aggressively with industry and across the U.S. government to take action. In addition, CISA initiated Cybersecurity Advisory Program and the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. The CISA program offers direct assistance to critical infrastructure organizations to help them enhance their cybersecurity posture. Cybersecurity advisors work with the private sector partners to assess their security practices, recommend improvements, and facilitate information sharing about emerging threats and vulnerabilities. The Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative serves as a hub for collaboration between the government and private sector, fostering real-time information exchange and joint efforts to tackle cyber threats. These programs highlight the proactive steps one of our key partners is taking to support industry and ensure that critical infrastructure sectors are well protected. When coupled with the collaboration opportunities sponsored by the National Security Agency at the Cyber Collaboration Center, these concepts create a powerful means to share and prepare across industry and the private sector. They are also a means to scale these insights globally. It is possible for U.S. business and government organizations to use the advisories in partnership with NSA and FBI and others and international partners to make the necessary investments in cyber hygiene to protect their networks. We can leverage these activities to generate the required alignment at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels of our organizations. To posture ourselves for resiliency in time of crisis, these partnerships enhance our capabilities and ensure that we can respond to emerging threats in a unified and effective manner. The collaborative relationships we build today are vital for preparation for crisis and essential for maintaining our strategic advantage. To enhance this, U.S. Cyber Command is focused on conducting coordinated operations, which involve sometimes as many as 20 foreign partners. This is how we build readiness in the scope of the responsibilities we share. As cybersecurity leaders and prepare for the increased scale and intensity we should anticipate in crisis and conflict. Furthermore, as a military cyber organization, we have turned a critical eye to our efforts to integrate cyber domain-specific operations and effects. The outcomes and operations that these partnerships enable do not become real without a deliberate collaborative approach within our organization. A successful operational approach has three key characteristics: detailed planning, repeatable processes, and the most important part, aggressive execution. This deliberate approach will then inform the allocation of resources for training and capability development. You've likely heard the maxim, the plan is useful, but that planning is essential. Planning creates a framework for preparedness and answers the question we are all asked, are you ready? It also exposes areas where policy may not align with operational realities of the domain. Without the alignment of policy, the type of collaboration is not possible. Policy is vital to establish legal boundaries, define the scope of cyber activities, and set standards. These are valid and important roles for policy. For example, when connecting various cyber networks and devices, a vulnerability to one system has the potential to create an exploitable condition for all connected networks and systems. Therefore, we must leverage our cybersecurity policies not to disintegrate our networks, but to increase the security and integration between ourselves, our allies, and our partners. Policy should be oriented toward mitigating vulnerabilities to an acceptable level of risk, informed by adversary intent and demonstrated capabilities by our adversaries, and balanced with the operational necessity of accomplishing the mission. However, rather than driving outcomes, policy is often seen as synonymous with restriction. Bureaucratic, no, I am from the government, within our organization. We continually seek to reframe policy and risk discussions with a hyper-focus on the necessary conditions for crisis and conflict, not the perceived, lower risk, steady state, competition environment we find ourselves today. In the cyber domain, we are in constant contact with our potential adversaries and do not need to inherit physical domain risk calculus. We should frame policy in terms of removing barriers to collaboration, and our policy framework must shift to a responsible yes, or even a yes if response framework. To quote General Hawk, we must change our organizational structures, relax constraints, and innovate to operate more effectively in a world where no single entity will have all the talent, all the intellectual capital, data, computing capabilities, or authorities needed to meet unexpected challenges and create and exploit fleeting opportunities. Policy must facilitate coordination and collaboration among various nations, government agencies, military branches, and private sector entities involved in cybersecurity. This is best measured by the effectiveness of our operations within the domain, as a response to adversary action or measured proactively to increase our posture and resiliency. That brings me to my third and final topic, how together we can meet the national security challenges of the 21st century. From a Department of Defense perspective, I see three critical efforts that will enable strategic and operational successes and counter threats: a robust network of allies and partners, resilience of our systems and operators and operating concepts, and finally, data-focused operations to counter the scale and intensity of 21st century conflict. I've already addressed the importance of allies and partners within the domain, but it's also important to note that my comments have largely focused at the operational level. At the strategic level, it is important to understand that as a nation, we build bilateral and multilateral international partnerships. Our adversaries have clients, we have partners and allies. Our adversaries' interactions are transactional, our interactions are collaborative. It is the strategic lesson of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. When faced with an authoritative threat to another nation, like-minded nations with shared values will respond. Coalitions will not fray, they will strengthen. Along with our strong alliances and partnerships, we must ruthlessly increase the resilience of our systems, our operators, and our operating concept. As I detailed earlier, we are in constant contact. This is not a 2027 or a 2030 challenge for our organizations. This is a 2024 challenge. We measure this resilience through integrated exercises, which provide opportunities for high-level integrated training, as well as opportunities for testing operational concepts and partnerships. Multinational exercises like U.S. Cyber Command's CyberFlag exemplify how cybersecurity collaboration can enhance our operational capabilities and resilience. CyberFlag is one of the most comprehensive and rigorous cyber defense exercises in the world. It simulates real-world cyber intrusion scenarios and challenges participants to defend against them in a controlled environment. The exercise includes participants from various branches of the U.S. military, federal agencies, allied nations, and private industry. By fostering a collaborative environment, CyberFlag enhances our ability to conduct joint operations and improves our collective cyber defense posture. The lessons learned and tactics developed during a CyberFlag are invaluable. Invaluable in preparing for actual cyber incidents, ensuring that all participants are well equipped to handle the complexities of modern cyber warfare. Exercising also highlights a means to drive innovation and adoption. When it comes to capabilities, unless it's an offensive capability, it's unlikely that our team in the United States Air Force will be the innovator. Though we have our share of innovators, industry and academia have greater breadth and likely depth of subject matter expertise. But that's where partnerships come into play. I want our airmen defenders to leverage emerging capabilities early in the adoption curve. I want to be an early adopter or a fast follower. We will drive mission resilience and mission outcomes through deliberate engagement with our federal, industry, and academic partners focused on outcome-driven activities. Where we can collectively learn by doing, our collaborations are pivotal to our strategy. So in summary, as a cybersecurity community, we find ourselves in contact today, be with authoritarian nations with malign intent or criminal actors as detailed by the Assistant Director. It is a 2024 challenge. For the Department of Defense, the scope of our missions for our cyber and cybersecurity operators, the scope they are executing today in competition. They are the same, they will be called upon, the same missions called upon them to execute during crisis or conflict. However, the scope will be the same, the scale and the intensity will increase dramatically. In this environment, we will succeed alongside our partners and allies. We will further ensure that success by continually increasing our resilience and a laser focus on leveraging our data and information in all aspects of our operations. Thank you for your time today and commitment to owning the cyber domain together. Thank you.
Yeah, we're not going to be on schedule. Don't worry. All right. Well, thank you, sir. What we're going to do here is, the general gave a great overview of what he does with the Air Force and with Cyber Command, and now we're just going to get kind of in the weeds on things in a more of a practical approach. And first off, if you could talk a bit about what you do now in the Air Force, on the cybersecurity front. Everyone has a thought process on that, but they really don't understand. So if you could you fill us in on that?
Okay, sure. For some of the cybersecurity aspects, so the way the Department of Defense is organized for executing and protecting our information networks. And when we look at information networks, it is traditional IT networks where we connect end devices and users to their data and their information, but it also includes weapon system networks, platform IT, and we have some responsibilities in exploring offensive technologies and ICS SCADA systems and things like that, though that is also some other organizations of authorities. So where Cyber Command focuses on is on the defense of the Department of Defense Information Network. And so we're organized in there. There's a headquarters that runs that organization, and it goes from General Hawk and the authorities down through that headquarters, and then all the services run their portions of that. So the Air Force Information Network. We execute the directive authority for cyber operations through that headquarters, and so that means every Air Force system, weapon system platform that networks together and touches the information domain, we're responsible for the security incident response monitoring type of activity. And so we integrate with many cybersecurity service providers. We also are the cybersecurity service providers for some of the systems in network and the larger network as we go forward. And so what that means is we have about 700,000 civilian, military, uniformed airmen in the United States Air Force. And then we're part of about a $4 million, it's a little more than that, 4 million user base inside of the Department of Defense. And so we're ensuring the delivery of systems and services, as well as the primary mission is securing and operating and defending as part of a collaborative organization as we go forward. So that's how we do that. We execute that primarily from, we're a global enterprise that execute that. The headquarters is run by a colonel, which is a mid-tier professional in the United States Air Force, and he is responsible currently. It's Colonel Josh Rockhill, and he guides that organization globally with airmen all the way from the peninsula in Korea all the way through Germany across the entire globe as we do that. The execution edge, the base level kind of support, user support, is done by communication squadrons. They do not report to us, so there's a whole ecosystem out there, but they do take tactical direction from us. The other portion too, there we have representatives here from Hanscom, and so those that you didn't know, Hanscom Air Force Base is the one that's responsible for providing a lot of our technology and acquiring the capabilities within our network and driving that. They're also leading a place in the Air Force. We're looking at how do we consume industry standard types of service delivery at base level. So uniform members were then monitoring the security and integrating with those partners, but they're not necessarily in the service delivery, and that way we can have those airmen focused on expeditionary type of capabilities and further supporting our uniformed forces as they have to go out on tactical edge and fight.
Perfect. All right, and next piece here too is, can you talk a bit about, like, really on Cyber Command, right? Like, everyone has that thought, again, what does Cyber Command do? Can you talk about, and you gave an overview of it, but how Cyber Command works, but then talk a bit about how they work with law enforcement, or how they don't work with law enforcement, how they work with the intelligence community, and, possibly how are they working with critical infrastructure, if at all?
Okay, sure. And I'll talk about the structure. Specifics, obviously, are not going to be able to share too much on specifics to the
We're all friends
in the room. Yeah, we're friends. There's that camera right there. And as we're going forward, though, come on, you were a JAG, you know that. Come on. But in general, so Cyber Command is structured offensive. There's some primary missions that Cyber Command has been given. Defense of the nation, as all combatant commands have that role and responsibility. Defense of the Department of Defense Information Network, and then also supporting the combatant commands are the three primary missions. Within that structure, there's components that go across, and we look at offensive, defensive, and cybersecurity type missions within that, like I kind of detailed. Prior to this job, I was the director of operations at Cyber Command. So in that role, I was responsible to General Nakasone and now General Hawk for kind of looking at those operations and help support that with resourcing, structure, concept of operations, and alignment of authorities so that our commanders could execute their mission. On the critical infrastructure piece, Cyber Command is a wholly externally focused organization. And what I mean by that is outside the shores of the United States, right? As far as looking at the adversary and what they're doing out there is where we would go and do activities. For any kind of internal coordination, the chart that the assistant director had up showing the authorities, we would partner with. And so we would not be executing operations, but we might be part, whether it's counterintelligence, which is a lot of the times is what we do. And the services also have their own counterintelligence branches that work very, very closely with the FBI. And at the national level, we would then, if we have information that we see externally, where we have sensors and we're out looking at the environment, we would share with the FBI. As we're going forward, we share with CISA as we talk through, and the National Security Agency, and those are, and Cyber Command, and those are the four key players in this space. The other intelligence agencies are also involved in looking externally and bringing those in. But if we see something, let's say it's a terms of service violation, let's say it's a threat to a critical infrastructure sector, we would go to the FBI and CISA. They would then use their authorities to either notify the company or do things like that. We do have direct relationships with companies, but it's more information sharing on the threat intelligence side. It's not necessarily on the action. We have our teammates on our wing on that kind of thing. They also get a little persnickety if we're if we're doing on that. But we're very careful that that's how we align those types of authorities. So when you see the other kind of outlier is a critical infrastructure sector known as the DIB. Right, the Defense Industrial Base. So the Defense Industrial Base, we do have some other type of relationships because we are the Department of Defense is the executive agent with responsibility, the agency that interacts with the DIB. So when you're saying the DIB, these are what you think of the big prime contractors and things like that. And so we will interact, but again, it's with our counterintelligence organizations and it's with some other authorities. Maybe the director of the National Security Agency has some national security system authorities and responsibilities because the information contained and accessed by the DIB is the director's responsibility to ensure the security of that information. And so that's another place where we might interact again. But if it's within a U.S. territory or state, then we're working with the partners on that kind of sharing.
But the key to this is that the communication's going, yes, the back and forth, and just a sharing of information.
It is. I mean, there are. I'm not going to share my boss's schedule, but just to let you know that there is a standing interaction at the director commander level across that activity where they synchronize quite often to make sure that they're understanding and aligned as we're going forward and sort of things. As when you look at things like election defense and things like that, we're making sure what we're seeing externally, what our adversaries may be potential malign intent or anything they're doing there, we're making sure that that's being shared across the interagency.
And can you talk a bit, you mentioned the National Guard, the Air Guard. Can you talk a bit about, because we have this, many of our students have been signing, you come and do a great promo, and they come in and they sign up because it's a great opportunity not only to serve, but get expertise in cyber, and they're taking that out in the private industry. Can you talk a bit about opportunities there, and then how, I know there was like a talk of possibly getting 150 billets up here in cyber for Hanscom Air Force Base. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So first of all, if you haven't heard, I know this is a little bit more of a senior officer, but we have raised the age where you can come enlist in the United States Air Force. So if you're in your early 40s, you're still open to you. We got brochures afterwards. But as talking to that as specific as we're going forward, it's a total force. For those that aren't directly familiar with how the Air Force is structured, and most of the services are structured similar, it's a total force type of opportunity. And what I mean by that, there's the active duty component, which is the largest component, but then there's a guard and a reserve, and then there's 3 different statuses that you can serve in either one of those components, and the status is officer, enlisted, or civilian. And so the idea as we're going forward is we do have, just like Kevin mentioned, is folks will come into the active duty, and a lot of times if the transition, you can go to the reserves or the guard afterward. The guard, you can grow up in the guard, and many of our guardsmen do, but you can also transition into the guard out of active duty, although it's usually, you grow up in. On the reserves, however, it's usually you just transition in from active duty into the reserves. You were a reservist. You're very familiar with that out as it's going forward. So that is the means to leverage the talent. And the key here, like I said in my remarks, is the intellectual capacity is really the important piece. The capabilities will change. We'll get that. We can consume that generally with a checkbook. But what I can't develop and consume necessarily is the individual in the billet, because to execute the authorities, I can't execute authorities generally through a contract vehicle. I have to execute authorities through an individual where the authorities trace through warrants and commissions and things like that. And so as we're looking to gain that talent, we have to make sure we're keeping that internal to the organization. And the decision-making responsibilities also have to align to an individual that's within a service role as we're going forward. So we need to capture that talent. And the idea is to keep it wherever we can if they want to retain in whatever their life situation is, make it open for service. With specifics to Hanscom, I'm not sure exactly on the 150. On the 150, I think that's largely what we're looking across. In the United States Air Force, we're looking at a reorganization effort focused on great power competition. What this is the Chief and the Secretary have tasked the United States Air Force to look at us as from at the end of Desert Storm, there was a massive drawdown in the United States Air Force. We were cut in half. And then we were then postured to fight the wars that we have fought from 9/11 over the last 20 years. As we're looking to a different strategic environment in the 21st century, the Secretary and the Chief are asking, how should we be postured for that potential conflict? And so as we're looking forward on that, then we're saying, as we're acquiring our capabilities, maybe looking about how do we structure like things together. And one of the things is the Information Dominance Center, looking at how we're acquiring those capabilities that are vital to our airmen and our joint forces are needed. And so I think that's probably related to Hanscom, but I'm not 100% on that, but that's my sense.
No, that's perfect. And right now, we can talk a bit about, Ukraine, things
Sure.
going on, talk a bit about cyber warfare. First off, can you talk a bit about what you're seeing, in a general sense, no pun intended, sir, but of really like, how's it playing out? Because everyone talked, pre anything that would happen in the Ukraine, with Russia attacking, that it was going to be all out cyber warfare and they'd be shutting down critical infrastructure and things along those lines. Can you talk a bit about what you're seeing there? And then tie it in together, because recently I just read in the Wall Street Journal, there's an issue with China where they're lingering in the critical infrastructure. They're not stealing anything. It's more they're setting up camp there, and the impact and your thoughts on what we can do or what you're doing with the Air Force and Cyber Command to address that.
That's a single question in 22 parts, Kevin. All right.
That's called some good lawyering.
Okay, I'll take the perceptions of cyber in the Russia-Ukraine conflict right now. And so what I think we expected a larger scale. It's always hard to tell what the adversary is thinking as we're going forward. I think one of the key things is the level of information sharing and partnering with Ukraine prior to the conflict, I think got them in a posture where they were well postured to defend themselves in the domain. The second thing I think we'd look at is this isn't their first time in this type of high intensity cyber environment. They had the 2014, 2015, and I think they'd learned quite a few lessons on that. So the indications and warning, the partnering with other governments as well as industry to prepare themselves and kind of get their resilience and that other activity. And then I think there's some about the execution. If you look at how the war was executed from externally, and you can read this in open source, the integration across domains didn't appear to be there, I'll just say, how the Russians executed their campaign. That isn't to say there weren't things going on, because there were and there are. And it's a constant. And the other portion to think about too, as we're going forward, is a long conflict. All organizations are learning organizations. The question would be how steep their curve is. And given 2 years of conflict, I think you're going to continue to see both sides of this conflict improve, increase, leverage differently in the cyber domain. We have to keep changing and keep supporting in that aspects of that. The other portion too is there was a large scale Viasat hack in the early parts of this conflict. I think given the perceived lack of coordination of that and what the impact would be to the scheme of maneuver on the battlefield, some resilience in their systems, some other alternative means of communication, and then also in the physical domain, there were a lot of things happening that were more impactful on the battlefield at the time and more impactful in the strategic environment when you have an invasion going on that is significantly impacting a civilian population. Some Viasat terminals going down across Europe don't necessarily balance out across that. So I think that might be so. But as far as today and going forward, with as you've heard the president and the EUCOM commander and General Hawk talk, the continued support by NATO to a free nation that was unjustly invaded is a continued policy as we're going forward, and we're continuing to support, and that includes all domains to include the cyber domain.
Right. And on that you talk about everything organizations learning. Are we learning, how they conduct their offensive capabilities, and is that something we're bringing back to the United States to buffer our defenses?
Yeah, that's kind of the key of Hunt Forward operations, Kevin, too, is when we see in our allies and partners, and so that works is they invite us they ask us to come and support them in a network, and we'll talk to them about, hey, what networks kind of make sense and they're vital to your interests, maybe things that you've seen in your indications, maybe things that we've seen, and we'll go there, and in that process we learn about the TTPs, and we see how that's, how they're working and doing those sorts of things. And like I mentioned, we sometimes expose their malware that they're using. We understand their C2. We look in other places, but the framework and the tools as we're going forward, we'll kind of see. What we see in most cases, and this is kind of extracting it from the Ukraine conflict, and I think most of the cybersecurity folks in the room, these aren't 0 days for the most part. These are end days. These are known vulnerabilities that haven't been patched, and a lot of times they're masquerade opportunities where we get phished. I haven't been phished yet, but I'm sure there's 5 emails in my inbox right now, as all of you have. But it's masquerade type of operations is what we see, and then the elevation of privileges and things. Those are the things that, in general, that we see from the criminal actors. That whether they're integrated or not, I think a lot of time it's opportunistic. On the military side, we do see a little more of the, maybe of some of the 0-day exploits. That was mentioned by the assistant director about SolarWinds. That was, one of the more exquisite type of planning and operations. The execution, again, you got to do all 3 parts. Aggressive execution, you got to do all 3 parts. The detailed planning, the delivered planning seemed to be there, the processes, but somehow in the execution that broke down for our advantage because we were able to discover it and eradicate it. So I think that's so we do learn from those activities. Kind of pivoting to what were mentioned, like you said, the Wall Street Journal article. I think it quoted General Hawk, if I remember correctly.
Was, yeah.
The living off the land. That's again, it's exactly what the assistant director was talking about. And so gaining access, whether it's through a known exploit, a new exploit, and then gaining access, establishing some level of persistence, and then just living on the tools that are available within our environment by what is perceived as an actor that is supposed to be allowed to be in the environment. And so what we do on those is the hunt. It's called hunt hardened mission. So we'll have forces that go and look at networks, whether they're related to mission systems or related just historic networks, and we'll look for the adversary in the places that we historically seen or things we might see in intelligence where they've been. We'll go and look. If we see that activity. But what we generally find more often is places that for potential exposure. And then we will provide those to the cybersecurity service providers to do that type of mission. Cyber Command is not postured or organized in a way to go in and do all the cleanup and then sit on networks. We go in to help scale the capability within there, enhance the capability within there, highlight some of the things that we've seen in our operations, and then set up that operational relationship. One of the efforts at Cyber Command is called operationalization, which is, I don't think, a real word, but we like to make up our own words, of the cybersecurity service providers. And so that is one of the things that we're looking at as we go forward on that.
No, that's perfect. And on the critical infrastructure side, most people might not know, most of it's privately owned. The critical infrastructure. And so when we're looking at that, and this was key what you're saying, it's really like, DHS, CISA is working with that. Then we have the law enforcement side. On the federal side, we're thinking FBI. And then, you're forward in its national security. Do you see this changing down the road where the Department of Defense or Cyber Command, because when you think of cybersecurity, it really falls under the umbrella of national security. And it just seems like this is really a national security threat. Do you see anything changing there, or just more collaboration between the different equities?
So this is personal opinion now. This isn't department policy.
Yes.
I think there's space there, as you mentioned the different the Guard. I think there's space here for local governments to use cybersecurity expertise in state status to potentially help in that area and coordinating the authorities. I don't see a direct role for U.S. Cyber Command in there, maybe outside of the defense critical infrastructure or the defense industrial base, but even then we have to coordinate, and it's largely a counterintelligence type of coordination mechanism. But I think in the future, as we're scaling the capabilities of our, or kind of moving our Guard into the 21st century capabilities that we see in the Air Force, there is less iron in the Air Force, less aircraft. And as we're looking at missions, but we don't want to, the key portion isn't the iron, the key portion is the airman. And so as we keep some capabilities and some intellectual capacity there, how do we maybe scale them into different missions? I think there is an opportunity here to grow that capacity. So if there were intrusions or things like that in critical infrastructure within state model, that the governor or the secretary of state could then
work with their federal agencies to kind of do something like that. I think there's opportunity there as we're going forward. The other place that we're looking is one of the components of Cyber Command is the Coast Guard. They have a component, and they look at the maritime transport system, and they have, they're underneath DHS as they do that. And they're looking at a Coast Guard auxiliary, which is a different method of service. They already have a Coast Guard auxiliary that does like a lot of your boating and safety and things like that. That's auxiliary members. And then they're looking at, is there a way to have a cybersecurity cyber portion? They do have some of that. The capacity isn't, it's not large yet, but that is one of the things Coast Guard's looking at.
Perfect. Before we wrap up, would you like to take some questions from the audience?
Questions would be great.
All right. Does anyone have a question? Sir. And I'll repeat it. So, The question was, and that's from Mark Mayberry, Holy Cross grad. You're gonna have to leave the room. Okay, you can stay, and you'll get a discount at the bookstore too. So the question was, there's a new warrant officer program in the Air Force for cybersecurity. How's that going, and what's the retention rate?
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Mark. So for the Air Force, about the end of, like in the 1980s, we decided that we, unlike the Army, that the warrant officer, we were going to use senior master sergeants and chief master sergeants to kind of fill that role. Over the course of time, what we've seen is that the need for them to be leaders within our organizations might have reduced the opportunity for continued senior level technical leadership or a technical track where airmen that serve as enlisted members in our force might not see. They say, okay, if I get promoted, but then I have to go do more staff type of activities, which are absolutely necessary to run an organization our size, but I'm not interested in that. Into the retention part, then the assessment was there might be a way to retain talent this way if we have a more clear path that says, no, you will be able to continue up. You'll have levels of authority and leadership. So there's still leadership required at our warrant officer, and it is a tiered pyramid structure. But we're not going to take a warrant and put you onto a different kind of staff level organization where you might have other enterprise and institutional responsibilities. Still highly valid, but it's like, okay, this is a path. So it's not going to be a very, very large one. But where this is looking at is we're going to have our first board here in the next month or two, if I remember, because our goal is to start our first cohort here in October. And so we've had applications. We've had a lot of interest in this. Now, for any airmen that might see this, or if you're mentoring any airmen that are interested in this track, it's highly competitive. Highly competitive. All right, we're current cohort, I believe we're in the 35 number with maybe 35, and then we're kind of looking at that to follow. So, and the grand total number in the future, we're not sure the whole numbers, but I think we're talking in the hundreds, less than 500. This isn't the thousands and 2,000s. Just kind of to baseline the number right now for on-net cyber operators that are enlisted, we're a little less than 1,000 across our force. For our intelligence professionals that also are really focused on the cyber domain, also about 1,000. So this would be a subset of that type of capability. And it's really looking to folks to come in. We're looking at folks in other services that might be warrants to come in as we go forward. And so we're having this first board. Lots of interest in doing that. And my perception, if this is a way to have a path to help with the second part of your question, Mark, is the retention, then I'm all for it. We're trying to find ways to be flexible across those different categories that I mentioned, but if someone sees themselves and they say, okay, more predictability, more understanding of how I would be leveraged for a 20, 25, 30-year career, then maybe a little more likely to stay versus at the 6 to 10-year point where you're highly technical, highly employable. For any of the companies in the room, don't talk to any young airmen if you see any. Unless they've made the decision, then talk to them and get them a great job. But as we're going forward on that, but for the reservists in the room, get them first. But I think that's what we're trying to do. The mission we offer, you can't do the mission anywhere else, right? You can be similar, but there are some missions that you're only going to do in uniform. Otherwise, the individuals in the front row might come talk to you. And so if you want to do those missions, come and do them with us within the authorities and the legal frameworks that we have as a nation. If there are other opportunities to serve in other components, we can do that as well. What we find is it's not usually compensation. Usually it's the disruption of family is what's driving most of the retention. And now on the exit survey, I'm not a huge fan of exit surveys because, sometimes we've convinced ourselves where we're going to be at that point, right? When we're leaving, we made a decision. What really got you there, I'm not sure. We know what we're telling ourselves and we're telling everybody at that point. But I do believe one of the things that's consistent is the disruption of the family opportunities and how we're doing that. And our family dynamics have changed. Most are dual income, dual working spouses. Most have, families at that time, and the stability of not having to move puts a lot of stress on the family and on the careers. And so if we can find a way to help with that in conjunction with this, I think that'll help us with our retention.
Perfect. Chris. So, question coming from Chris Lee. He's a EVP and CISO over at Eversource. His question is regarding critical infrastructure, energy, you name it. Is there an opportunity for critical infrastructure to share information back and forth with Cyber Command?
So 2 points, 2 ways that we do that. So right now, our cyber wing, which is, again, a kernel-led organization that's below me, that's also in San Antonio. We have a relationship with the local energy company through a CRADA, which allows us to go in and do that type of discussions and operations. At the Cyber Command level, we would likely consume that through the National Security Agency Cyber Collaboration Center and those relationships. Any kind of direct one, we would go over to CISA, most likely, if there's what that means. For those that aren't aware, there are several federal cyber centers. Cyber Command and Joint Force Headquarters, DODIN, are 2 of them, but all the other organizations have, the 5 other ones that we share. That would be the means that we would do that as we consume that. So that if I were in an energy company and I wanted to build that threat intelligence and information sharing, I would start at the National Security Agency Cyber Collaboration Center, as well as potentially the CISA Collaboration Center. Thank you.
Perfect. We'll take one more question. You in the back, maybe I'll hear it. Go ahead. You. Yes, ma'am. Sure. So the question, just for the folks on streaming in, is can you talk a bit about the soft skills in cybersecurity that's being developed with the Air Force and in Cyber Command, if at all? I know they are.
Great question. As you know, our team isn't known to be extroverts as we're going forward on that. But what I find in practice is we put them in environments that we teach the team building. And so the Air Force, we're really good at small team leadership, right? And it doesn't matter, you could be a card-carrying introvert and think, we're still going to ask you to do that, and we're going to teach you some skills and talents. And what I find is small team collaboration at that level where it's low risk of failure, those types of opportunities, giving folks at the very, very junior level that opportunity to do that across our enlisted force. Officer force, we do this for 4 years in their commissioning source, and then we do it on it. And so in general, their soft skills, there are exceptions, and you can point them out to me, but they are pretty good at doing that kind of outreach. It's on our enlisted side where they'll be interacting much quicker at more junior ages largely. But we give them those opportunities, and we put them in the small teams. And that's with getting, folks out of the way. There's a captain that introduced me today. He might be in the room, but that would be the senior rank. That's kind of the opportunity there to get the folks. It's a low risk of failure type of environment, is to build those interactions to really trust themselves because they're the expert. What I tell folks whenever they're doing these kind of engagements, it might be apprehensive if they're going, just remember, you're the expert. You're the expert in the room. Even when you're briefing our board of directors, we have airmen that'll go brief the Secretary of the Air Force. I just tell them, and our Secretary is highly, technical engineer, but it's like, more about this than the Secretary does. So just be confident as you're going forward in that. But I don't throw them on day 2. Hey, welcome to 16th Air Force. Let's go to DC. So we do provide those opportunities as we go forward. In a collegiate environment, I think, one of the things Kevin mentioned to me talking up here for the CISO type of training, they mentioned mock, actually it was your colleague that mentioned it to me, a mock cross-examination. Similar type things, I think, in the academic environment, if you can do workshops and actually do those types of things, those have been highly successful for me in my career as we've gone forward, whether it's practicing for advocacy type of events or just, briefings like that. That's the other thing we do in the Air Force, in the military, we rehearse. And so do that.
Oh, we'll take one more. Yes, ma'am.
What I can share here, so the question was on the Volt Typhoon discussions that was in the journal article, do I have a sense of a timeline of what they might be going toward? What I will go back toward is just what has been publicly said, like the assistant director. And if you look at what President Xi has said on behalf of the PRC, is he wants his military to be ready. He didn't say go, but to be ready, if necessary, to take Taiwan by force by 2027. That is out there. We can go and read that out there. That doesn't mean that's the date. That doesn't mean to go, but that just means he's laid down a level of expectation, like we all do as leaders of organizations. Like, hey, nothing moves you out like a deadline. He's like, okay, I want you to be ready to do this by this timeline. What I could share here, I haven't anything else is like there's imminence or things like that. If there were, then we would work with the organizations represented in this room and posture in those sort of ways. What I do know is that to be ready, as I mentioned, is we need to really increase the resilience of our systems. And as we look at any future from a pure military perspective, and I think would apply also to critical infrastructure sectors, to expect business as usual when the adversaries increase the intensity of their attempted compromises is not there. Like good continuity of operations planning. It works at the bookstore, it works in your company. But also to assume it's going away and never to come back, we can't resource plan to that. One of the Defense Science Board, actually, I had an interaction with them many years ago, and one of the insights I took is if you plan for your garrison communications and your competition-based communications to be your wartime communications and your expeditionary communications, you can't afford that. You just can't afford it. And structurally, you're not thinking hard enough, I would say, to our team, is what I mean. What I mean by that is to operate, what are the key data requirements? What are your key information requirements? Who do you have to talk to and how often? And then what latency do you need? And then we design our system to that, not to what I operate with every day under, ground speed. In the aircraft world, we call it, ground speed 0. Not at that level, but at 550 knots at 200 feet. What do you need as when you're going? Which I always I'm a B1 pilot, so anytime I can use a B1 acronym, I try to do that, even in the cybersecurity. So that's kind of where we are.
No, that is great. And just to follow up on the soft skills, to help you out, I know this master's degree program. I knew you would like that one, Lisa. So right here at Boston College, we're happy to help out anytime. No, for that, sir, thank you so much for your time. We did get you a nice gift here. And I got a lot of grief from your adjutant on, make sure this is a government ethics. So what we did is with BC Vets and the ROTC program here, there is no issue. So it's a government command. So here you go. Awesome. Thank you, sir. That was awesome. Thanks.